Welcome to So You Say, a podcast about the words we use, why we use them, how we use them, and how it affects our everyday life. Ultimately, we will be discussing the power behind our words. I'm Holly.
And I'm Susan. In our time together, we're going to explore those common phrases that we say to ourselves and others around us, the impact that those phrases make, and how to avoid the unintentional negative consequences those words may have. So You Say, we'll explore how even the smallest of words can have such a large impact for you and those around you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to So You Say, the podcast that you love about the words that we speak and how they can positively or negatively affect our lives. As always, I'm Holly, and I'm joined again tonight with my bestie, Susan. How are you doing over there?
I'm good. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, goodness, girl, you know, we're best friends. We talk every day.
I know. I
It has
gotta
been
tell
a
you.
week. We actually just said before we got on this podcast that I'm drinking a hot toddy and Susan got a visit from God. So it has been an eventful evening for both of us.
Quite the way to kick off the new year, I guess. But yeah, sometimes you just have those days that feel like days, with a
Oh, yeah.
capital D. So, but I'm happy to be back. I'm super excited about the topic that we're going to tackle today. And it looks like we're going to break this up into a two-parter,
Yeah, I think we
which
are.
is
We've
pretty neat.
decided that I think we do better off with little short segments that work in two parts. And we're probably going to continue on that trajectory of doing that. I think it works for us. I think it works for everyone else. And considering I've spent the past week pretty sick, I don't know how long my voice will last, but we will do our best. And with that said, because I have spent the past week canceling a lot of plans and disappointing a lot of people, today's podcast that you will be listening to is about the words forgive and forget, or us saying, I can forgive, but I can't forget. And what the truth is behind those words, what they really mean, what their definitions are, maybe a little bit of history, a little bit of studies, a little bit of research. But we felt that it was really important to discuss the words, I can forgive, but I can't forget, or I can forgive and I can't forget.
Yep. I like this topic. I think this is so timely when we're talking about, at the time that we're recording this, we're still looking at the brand new year. So we're talking about people who are reflecting on the past, looking forward to the future. And this is definitely a topic I think that has both strong ties to what's occurred in the past and what you might be envisioning your future to look like. So the idea of forgiving and forgetting.
Yeah, it definitely ties into our last podcast about New Year, New Me a little bit. We're not telling you to take on the resolution of I forgive and forget, or I forgive but I can't forget. But we want you to understand what these words mean. And let's get into it. Let's first start, as we always do, with the definitions. And the definition of forgive, defined by psychologists, is actually a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. So basically, it means choosing to not let negative events from the past affect how you feel about someone or something in the now, in the present, today. So, Susan, let's talk about this.
I love that, first of all, that they tie in that it's a deliberate, conscious decision, that it's a decision that you actually need to make. Forgiving is not a natural thing, it's not an automatic thing, it's not what I might term, our primordial brain function. That this is something where you have to take into consideration and think about actually taking the action of releasing these feelings of resentment and vengeance towards somebody or something that you perceived has wronged you. So there's a lot of levels when it comes to the idea of forgiving. And I don't know if prior to kind of hearing this definition, I don't know if I had thought about how multi layered the idea of forgiveness actually is. And I even find myself sometimes questioning in every situation, could I truly find myself in a position of forgiving that's really adheres to this definition?
Yeah. So, since I'm always the one dropping F bombs, shall I already drop one in the first 5 minutes of our podcast and say, forgiving is fucking hard, okay? It
Yeah.
really is. This is not an easy thing to do. And if you listen to the definition, it is very complicated. So, therefore, making the choice to forgive is also complicated. If you are sitting in a decision to forgive or not forgive somebody, and you are hem, haw, seesaw, back and forth, can't figure out if you can or can't do it, that I think is completely normal, completely human, and completely okay. Because just based on the definition alone, it is complicated. It is not easy to forget and forgive, or forgive and forget, or just forgive or just forget. So that's what we're going to
Hmm.
get into here. So the next definition we're going to hit on is forget. And that defines as the memory has disappeared and it is no longer available, or the memory is still stored in the memory system, but for some reason it cannot be retrieved. Now, I have said this before in past podcasts. My memory sucks. And it is because of a health situation that I have gone through. I forget a lot of things. There has been multiple things in my life where literally my memory has disappeared and it is no longer available. It is as if it never, ever, ever happened. But this again is not easy to do, to actually forget. Because think about this,
Yeah.
forgetting is permanent.
Yeah.
Okay. The definition of forget is permanent. It is gone. Bye forever. In, out, gone. Okay. Forever. It never happened. Bye bye. So if we really look at the definition, can we have something happen to us where we can forgive and forget? Literally forget like it never, ever, ever happened.
The initial part of me, of course, says absolutely not. I mean, if you go by those definitions alone, you are never going to necessarily forget something that's put you in a position where you have to release feelings of resentment or vengeance i- or other negative feelings that you have to let go of. In order for those feelings to even be ingrained in you, whatever has occurred has made a lasting impact. For those negative feelings to come up, there is a strong lasting impact of whatever has occurred. So the idea that you could just forget, I don't, initially, I don't see that. However, I also know that the human brain is constantly evolving. And unfortunately, it also constantly is deteriorating. And so it could be possible, given an amount of time, for your memory to atrophy to the point where you actually do forget. But then I don't think that that really falls under this idea of this phrase that we're
No,
talking about, the idea of forgiving and forgetting. Somehow we think that one happens and then the other one has to happen immediately. That's what the phrase seems to kind of imply.
right,
And that just isn't biologically possible for us. We can certainly forgive, but I don't think in the act of forgiving, it triggers the forgetting. I think forgetting comes from just time, from just your brain and your operating systems growing older, and connections are lost and things like that, and that's possible to
right,
happen. But in the actual term of the phrase to forgive and forget, I think we're kind of fooling ourselves. So by using this phrase, we're you're setting yourself up in a certain sense for failure. If you think that your whole goal in forgiving is to forget, and then you're not doing that, when you're putting yourself under the pressure of, oh, I need to forgive and forget, you're putting yourself under an undue pressure for the second part, because you might not be able to forget.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that when you say forgive and forget in any way, that is a choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And forgetting really isn't a choice typically.
Yes.
So if you think about this phrase, I will forgive and forget, or I want to forgive and forget, I think the best way to phrase this instead is to say, I will forgive and let go,
Mm-hmm.
because that is a choice, right? We can let go by choice. We can't really forget by choice,
Right.
by definition.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we talked about the definitions too. I think a really fun fact, we hint on it at the beginning of the podcast here, is this idea of forgiving and forgetting has somehow really been tied into being a virtuous person. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm a
Jesus did
religious
it,
person.
right?
Yeah, I'm a religious person, or I'm a virtuous person, and therefore I have to, in my heart, learn how to forgive and forget. But here's a little twist: nowhere in the Bible is there the phrase forgive and forget. There are numerous references to forgiveness. There are numerous references to forgiving ourselves, to forgiving one another, but there's no reference to forgetting. And I think when you even look at, now we're using the Christian Bible as an example, but you can pull almost any religious text and
Right.
try to look for that idea of forgetting. Religion itself is designed to kind of reinforce and not cause forgetting. It's to reinforce the idea and make strong connections. So the idea of being able to forgive someone without the added part of having to forget the lesson or the experience or whatnot, that's carries throughout, whether you're a religious person or a spiritual person or not. You're going to find that the first half of this can be challenging, and the second half really is almost kind of out of your control. So if we can learn to let go of that second half and go, okay, how do we forgive and, like you said, move on? Or how do we forget and grow? Or how do we forgive and continue forward? Whatever
Right.
that might be, however that might look.
Right. And when we think about or say or feel that we need to use the phrase forgive and forget, typically it's based on an event, something
Hmm.
maybe traumatic, some sort of trauma that has affected our lives, something that is hurtful, something that has been a struggle, something that has caused pain. But this is what we have to remember. The truth is, we can grow from pain, and we can grow from not forgetting. And that's a little bit hard pill to swallow because so many people want to forget. But there's so many things that by not forgetting them, we grow because of. I could name personally 1,000 things. Think about all of the ex relationships that we all have, right?
Hmm.
The ex relationships that didn't go well, the ex relationships that may have been, and I hate to say this, abusive. Now, we're not going to forget them. We're not going to even maybe forgive them, but we can grow from not forgetting, and we can grow from this traumatic experience. And that's terrible in the sense that, of course, who wants to remember any type of trauma or abuse from a relationship? But I think that we can relate to this in the sense that once we saw what that relationship was like and we never forgot what it was like, we moved on forward looking for something of the complete opposite of that relationship. And that actually helped us grow as a human. And that put us in a better place in our life later on because we learned from not forgetting.
Yeah. Most folks, and I'm going to say most because, there are people who out there we have discussed in the past, people who are neurotypical. So what I'm going to do when I talk about at least the biology part of this is I'm not necessarily talking about the neurotypical brain. Most folks will, when faced with a traumatic situation or a hard situation or a painful situation, whether that pain is emotional or physical, you're biologically designed to remember the pain with the idea that if you remember it, you won't do it again. So the hope biologically was, and this goes all the way back to the cavemen. Cavemen are sitting in front of the fire. They go and there's a rock in the fire, and they go to grab the rock to move it, and they burn their hand. Ouch. Your brain made the connection and went, ooh, that's hot. Now you may not understand why it's hot. You might not understand, what caused the rock that's sitting in the flame to become hot enough to hurt you, but you did make the connection. And hopefully that connection sticks and you're not the next day reaching into the fire to grab the hot rock again. And if you are, hopefully that next time eventually you learn, but you don't forget. And we're designed to hold on to trauma. Our brains are designed to hold on to trauma in a protective way. And that might sound counterintuitive, but that's exactly what's going on. So yes, biologically, we're holding on to trauma so that we can hopefully protect ourselves. But when trauma becomes so ingrained, that's when we get into the idea of you can't, you become stuck in a spot. So this biological system, which was designed to kind of protect you and keep you going and keep you alive, as we've developed as a society, as we've developed as humans, has sort of become a double-edged sword where trauma and holding can be both a learning thing, but it can also hamper us as well. So the idea of forgiving and forgetting implies that you're moving on and you no longer think about the offensive act. But that's not a healthy thing, because if you're not aware of the offensive act or the offensive feeling or the bad thing, you're destined to repeat it.
Right,
So
right.
eventually you have to kind of learn this idea of how do I forgive, but not forget the lesson that I learned in this traumatic situation. Because again, if you never forgive either, on the other side of the coin, if you're constantly living and reliving all of your trauma, you're not going to be able to move forward in a healthy, sustainable way because you're going to be in a constant state of trauma.
Yes.
So forgiving is important. Forgetting is the piece that we're saying, hey, maybe you don't have to necessarily think about this as a forget situation. So then how would you approach it? Knowing how to forgive someone who's harmed you or a situation that's harmed you, that's an essential life skill. I mean, it can save friendships, it can restore faith in the people that we love, our kids. It can keep romantic relationships intact. It's such a good skill to be able to forgive someone, but find the balance of not allowing yourself to put yourself into the situation where you're experiencing the same trauma that you had, which caused you to have to forgive in the first place.
Yeah. Forgiving is a choice and a decision that we make. And forgetting, as what you have just said very clearly, is more about not forgetting, but more about moving on and letting go. Because forgetting, in a sense, really won't help you really completely, because if you forget about that abusive relationship or you forget about that traumatic experience, then you've learned nothing, and you will go back into those same phase of your life or the same relationship in your life that you were already in that caused you pain or suffering or hurt or damage. So yes, deep breath. What we are trying to say, recap really quickly, is that forgiving is a choice. It is hard. We decide on what or who or how or when we want to forgive. And forgetting is probably impossible, if not impossible. So instead, we are telling you not to necessarily change the phrase to forgive and let go or forgive and move on, but to think about the phrase more in that sense, because it definitely creates more of a realistic way to look at how to handle whatever it is that you think that you need to forgive and forget on.
Yeah. It's an opportunity to feel empowered. And the empowering part comes in the first part of that phrase, which is the idea of forgiveness. And then the second half of forgetting is really something that's kind of out of your control. So maybe don't dwell on that so much. Focus on what you can control, which is the forgiveness portion. Be empowered by the idea that you can make this conscious choice. And then the rest is just there. You may forget. Your brain may cause you to forget one day, but
Hmm.
that's not within your control.
Yeah. And that could be
Oh,
a good or bad thing, by the way,
yeah.
forgetting. I have lots of memories that have been forgotten that I did not intentionally want to forget, but it was almost a good thing that I kind of did forget them, or that my body decided to forget them, should I say, because it's better off that way. So we're not saying to always think about remembering everything. Sometimes I really believe your body or your mind will tell you, or will just do that for you. They will just forget the memory for you if you really have to. That could be a good or bad thing, as we said. But we looked into some studies here. We did some pretty extensive research into studies here. And in 2015, by the National Institute of Health, they actually did a study on forgiveness and the two types of forgiveness that exist. So the first type is decisional forgiveness. And this is making a conscious decision to let go of feelings, anger, resentment, and putting them in the past, and then moving forward free of the effects those feelings can bring to you, how they can make you feel, what they can make you do, whatever. The other was emotional forgiveness. So that is actually replacing negative emotions toward the person who has wronged you, and with positive ones such as sympathy, compassion, or empathy. Now, as we say these three things, I am really thrilled to say that we have a podcast coming up discussing sympathy and empathy and the difference, because they are very different. And I think a lot of people are not aware of how different they are. We're not going to get deep into this one because we want to kind of let you know that we'll be on deck in the future. But these are the two different types of forgiveness. And again, there was a study on these: decisional and emotional. And I'm sure that you can tell the difference.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, the decisional really comes from, I think, more of a place of logic. You may decide that the only solution is to let go, to put these feelings in the past. You may not have a full resolution when it comes to decisional forgiveness. There may be something going on for you that this is the only you've reached a point where it's the only choice that you have to make. So I think of the two, it's interesting because I think decisional can be incredibly challenging if you're faced with a situation where you don't know what else to do, and you're find that your only space or your only choice feels like forgiveness. That can be a really almost kind of a very logical approach to take, whereas emotional forgiveness is this idea of really swapping out. So where the conscious decision to forgive and let go of the anger is saying, okay, I have to let this go. The emotional is, I can still feel what's going on. I'm just going to shape it in a different way. And I think both choices have their pros and their cons, and it can depend on the situation. One of the big situations that I often think of when I think of forgiveness and this idea of forgiving and then how do you forget, um, revolves around families who've experienced trauma where they've had a loved one who was killed. I think that is a big, gigantic situation where you go, how do you find the ability to forgive somebody who's taken the life of your partner? And that's a gigantic question. We could probably do a whole episode just on that. I mean, we're talking about the death penalty. And there are some people out there who would say, no, I could never, ever, ever forgive the person who took the life of somebody that I love. And yet, there are quite a number of people out there who've experienced this. And through whatever reason, whether they find it through their faith in religion, whether they find it within themselves, whatever it may be, they have gotten themselves to the point of forgiveness. They don't forget the situation. Again, notice they're not moving to that second step. They're not saying, I forgot. I didn't forget that my loved one was taken from me, but they find a way to forgive. And that's a really heavy, heavy, serious situation. We can also talk about forgive and forget in just you have a friend who doesn't show up, for special things in your life or whatnot. And you've reached the point where you go, I can either continue to be mad at this person, or I can make the decision to let go of that anger or that expectation, in a certain sense, forgive who they are and what I need from them and what I'm not getting from them, and then go from there. Both of those can be done as a decisional forgiveness or an emotional forgiveness. Depends on what approach you want to take.
I just wanted to throw in here really quickly because I know a lot of people are going to think, like you said, how can you forgive somebody who has wronged you, regardless of the level of how they have wronged you? And as a meditation instructor myself, there's actually a meditation out there, a very popular meditation, and you can look it up if you want to. It's called the loving kindness meditation. And what you do is you put loving kindness toward yourself, you put loving kindness out into the universe, and then you put loving kindness out to people, just anyone, everyone, even people who have wronged you, even people who hurt you, even people who you don't like. And this can be life-changing. And this is all part of emotional forgiveness. So if it's something that you want to look into, if it's something that you want to research, please feel free. I actually love teaching loving kindness meditations because it is a huge piece of learning how to forgive and how to understand where other people are at, even if you don't like them, even if they have harmed you or hurt you. Now, there was a 2011 study that also suggests that forgiveness may give the person who has hurt you permission to continue the offense. In some cases, people who hurt others can manipulate the forgiveness process that you are working on to have toward this person. When forgetting, and I'm going to put that in quotes, what has been forgiven is challenging, learning from the experience may help some people cope if they encounter that behavior again in the future. We've kind of already stepped on this a little bit, and I literally just read that word for word off of the study. So, yes, and I wanted to make sure that I got that exactly correct. It has been a rough week for me. So basically what it is saying is that those people who hurt you will continue to hurt you if they can see that you are forgiving all the time, because they will start to take advantage of the fact that you are so forgiving.
I think I want to circle back to the definition of forgiveness being a conscious and deliberate decision, which means you've got to take some time to think about it. A conscious and deliberate decision means that you've weighed the pros and the cons. You've thought about the options. You've weighed the different choices that you can make, and you've decided that this is the right choice. So that in itself, by the very definition of forgiveness, means that there is some time, there is some intention. It's not just a rushed job. And I think what this study hit on is that if you are too forgiving, if you're forgiving to avoid thinking about the situation, if you're forgiving just to kind of get through all the yucky feelings and not deal with anything, not being conscious and deliberate about your choice, then yes, it's going to be very easy for people to take a look at that and manipulate the fact that you've forgiven and allow that offense to be repeated for you. I do think that You know, women have traditionally been more forgiving. And I think in a lot of cases it was to keep the peace. So that's not really a conscious, deliberate decision. It may be. It may come to that, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it is just to quell the upset, to not rock the boat, to move on. This idea, that we've talked about. And so you're not doing justice to the whole idea of exactly what is forgiving, which is really pondering and thinking about what has happened and making a very clear and deliberate choice because you've thought about it. Right. Yep. And again, I think it comes down to the more conscious and deliberate you can be about your choice to forgive, the stronger you're going to be when it comes to coming up against people who want to manipulate the choice to forgive. The more set you are in your understanding of why you made the decision that you did, the more you're going to be able to defend yourself against being manipulated because you're going to be more self-assured in the choice that you made to forgive.
Yeah. Forgiving and forgiving is not possible in every situation. It's probably not possible in most situations.
Yeah.
Some will learn from the experience. Others may forgive to release the past. Some will do it to accept what has happened. Sometimes others will still believe that no behavior can change what has been done. And it's all different. I think it's all situational, right? For all different types of people, for where we are in our lives and who we are. And that's why we wanted to talk about this, because I think that when people say, oh, just forgive and forget, they act like it is this easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And in reality, it is very hard. And I'm very happy that we touched on the fact that in regards to a religious aspect, there is nothing there that says to do this. So
Mhm.
if someone in your church or temple or wherever says to you, hey, Jesus forgave and he forgot, that is actually not accurate at all. That never happened. There's nothing there that said that. Understand that this is hard. However you handle it is okay. If you want to forget or not forget, it could benefit you either way, which is crazy. And if you want to forgive or not forgive, that can also benefit you either way, which also sounds crazy, but it is the truth.
Yeah.
And this is where we're going to stop with our part one, because we were already into our 30-minute mark here, and we were trying to make these a little more short and sweet for you guys. And I do need to pour myself another hot toddy, and I think we need to do a little, as my dad calls it, potty break. So let's go do that. Hot toddy and
Yeah.
potty. I said it.
I love it. And when we return for part two, we'll delve into, because again, I think the forgetting part really, we've really touched on the fact that it's almost out of your control. So we want to focus on the things that you can control, that you can work on, that you can, you know, develop. Just like a muscle, we want you to exercise. So we're going to talk to you about how can you exercise the ability to forgive. We're going to talk about in the second half here the mental and physical health benefits of forgiveness and the deliberate practice of forgiving.
And with that said, we are going to end this one and continue on to the next, talking about the mental and physical actual health benefits of forgiveness. And as always, Susan, I'm going to have you leave that social media information.
You've got it. So you can reach out to us through Gmail at so you say pod, all one word, at gmail.com. You can check us out on Instagram at so.you.say.podcast. And we are brand new on TikTok at So You Say Podcast. Again, that's all one word, So You Say Podcast on TikTok.
We will see you on part two. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.